I'm Caroline Hyde. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Airbnb's war chest expands, closing another $1 billion funding round. More on the second most valuable startup's IPO plans ahead. Plus, Julian Assange extends a hand to tech companies, complicating an already tense relationship between Silicon Valley and Washington. And Snap's sell-off takes a breather as it wraps up its first week of trading. What the street is banking on now. First to our lead. Airbnb raised more than $1 billion, valuing the home-sharing startup at about $31 billion. The company disclosed the funding in a filing with the SEC on Thursday. Bloomberg first reported its plans to increase the funding it was seeking by authorizing the sale of additional equity. That was back in December. Airbnb became profitable in the second half of 2016 and expects to continue to be profitable on EBITDA basis this year. Joining us now is Bloomberg Technology's Mark Millian, who helps cover the company. Mark, fabulous to have you with us as ever. They were raising and raising in 2016, and they seemed to double the overall amount. How much did we know that this billion-dollar closing was coming?
We did, like you mentioned, that we reported in December that they had expanded their target to raise about $1 billion. I mean, this is a very capital-intensive business, but we had also reported a couple months ago that the company was profitable for the first time in the second half of 2016, and they're also targeting profitability for this year, which is an encouraging sign for investors as they push ever closer to a long-delayed potential IPO.
Yeah, we'll dig into that. Where do we think that $1 billion is already going to be being put to work? We've seen them on the acquisition trail. They were splashing $300 million in a Canadian company. Do we expect more of that?
Yeah, well, they bought this, like you mentioned, luxury retreats. This is this Canadian high-end, you can rent a mansion or a villa in the Hamptons or, on the coast of Florida. They've articulated this vision to be this sort of full-service travel company right now. Their main business is really just renting out people's homes and apartments, but they want to add all these add-on services. In November, they launched these, add-on travel services, so you could get like tours and, go pick mushrooms in a forest with a tour guide. And so they want to do more of that, and they seem to be very much open to acquiring companies to get there. So that's one way that they could put some of this money to use. We also reported in Bloomberg Business Week a couple months ago that they're really looking at China this year as a point of expansion and could do a deal there, or they may just need to hire a bunch of bodies in Beijing to get that done.
We've also got to look at the valuation. $31 billion is pretty hefty, but if we think back to this time last week, and indeed Friday trading of Snap, they were at about a similar valuation. How do they sort of rank in terms of size and value?
Yeah, well, obviously Airbnb is the second most valuable tech startup in the United States, right behind Uber. A ways behind Uber. Uber, I think, is about $69 billion now. But yeah, I mean, they're up there. They've been around for almost as long as Uber has, or actually a little bit longer, so almost about a decade. And so they're getting to the point where I think some investors and outside watchers are saying, when is this company going to go public? But as this extra billion in total in this round shows, that they can hold out on the private markets for a while longer.
Sure can, Mark. You're sticking with me. I want to get our take now with a move away from Airbnb, more to the upcoming batch of tech IPOs that potentially are coming our way. Joining us now, partner at Greylock Partners, Chen. And Greylock is an investor in Airbnb, but Jerry covers enterprise businesses for the VC. Wonderful to have you here, Jerry. I first of all want to just cast our minds back to how much Brian Chesky has actually been trying to educate the market that perhaps we shouldn't be expecting him anytime too soon. He's told us this back in March. Just have a little listen.
Sure. Well, I think a great company should always be ready to go public because you want to operate your company. Once you're a size like us, you want to operate your company like a public company. You want to have all the fiduciary duties in place, but we don't have any initial need. We don't have any more need for capital. And so, we definitely don't have plans over the next 2 years to go public. And then after that, we'll kind of see.
You were saying there, look, don't expect us to come to market for the next couple of years. But is 2017 going to be a good year for exits, for IPOs? Because so much excitement was built up around the Snap IPO.
Sure. I think 2016 wasn't a great year for IPOs. So you see a bunch of public investors really still thirsting for access to tech companies. So I think if you look at 2017, there's a bunch of companies that are high quality, especially on the enterprise software side, that I expect could go public in 2017.
So you're thinking more the Dropboxes of this world, that sort of element?
Well, I don't know about Dropbox per se, but I know like MuleSoft is probably going to go public in 2017. That's a great company. And so all these companies that are enabling enterprises to move to the cloud or rethinking how they do business, there's a growth secular story around them, around cloud, around SaaS. And number two, I think public investors really want to have access to this growth, and they haven't had that for 2015, 2016. So I think they're thirsty for a sizable IPO.
Mark, I just want to bring you back in because how frustrating do you think it is that these companies like Uber, like Airbnb, can just keep on raising cash from the private markets and they're just going to delay and delay as much as they can?
I think it is somewhat frustrating for the investors and for many of the employees who are locked up in these shares that many of them cannot offload or get liquidity to put money down on houses or to get out of this heavy amount of compensation that they've had. But Uber and Airbnb have shown this stubbornness to stay private and as you said, this ability to keep raising money. I think, as you mentioned, Snap is an interesting example of a company that seems to be, I mean, there was obviously the usual rocky first few days after the initial public offering, but it seems to have been, by many measures, a successful IPO. A lot of people are saying that it's probably more of an outlier, and they're looking more for that the other company you mentioned, MuleSoft, which is more of like a business software company, to more set the standard of opening the floodgates as some are expecting. AppDynamics was another one they thought was going to do that, but then, you know, Cisco swooped in and bought them out of nowhere at the 11th hour.
Funny you mention AppDynamics. Of course, that was yet another portfolio company of Greylock's. So your enterprise is going to be hot. What are the pulls and the pushes when you are talking to your portfolio companies right now about whether they come to the market 2017? Because as we heard it, employees potentially want it. Maybe yourself, VCs want to see an exit, but they perhaps don't want to have the overbearing watch of the investor base. Not that actually Snap has managed to have that.
Well, I think consumer companies and enterprise software companies have different reasons to go public. I think there's liquidity reasons that's kind of universal. But for an enterprise software company, you're selling to other companies, they kind of want you to go public. If you're a large Fortune 50, Fortune 100 company taking a bet on some new cloud service, new application, a public stock that's a branding event, B, a visibility event to understand how solvent, how liquid you are, how successful you are, gives a lot more certitude around your future as a vendor. And so I think for an enterprise software company, their buyers care if you're public or not. And I think you'll see enterprise companies typically go IPO earlier than some of these consumer companies. Where on the consumer side, I think their need to go public is less related to their customer base, but more for the other reasons you just mentioned.
We're going to be discussing Snap later in the show, but I wanted to get your take on the precedent they really set. We'd seen it slightly from the playbook of Facebook and Google, Alphabet, but now to see a company list in the US with absolutely no shareholder voting rights whatsoever, is this something we're going to see again and again, or is it one-off?
Well, I think it's more one-off, right? If you look at the vast number of offerings, it's not very typical. I think there are a handful of companies like a Facebook or a Google that has the ability to do that, can do these super voting rights for the founders or for shareholders. But I think the typical listing still looks pretty vanilla to me.
And more listings to come.
More listings to come, hopefully.
Hopefully, so says the VC, of course. Bloomberg's technology, Mark Milan, thank you very much indeed for joining us as ever. Greylock Partners, Jerry Chen, you're sticking with me. Now, another top story we're watching. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange offered an explanation for why his group splashed thousands of purported CIA files on the internet this week. He spoke on a webcast this morning.
The CIA developed a giant arsenal, what appears to be the largest arsenal of Trojans and viruses in the world that attacks most of the systems that journalists, people in government, politicians, CEOs and average people used, didn't secure it, lost control of it, and then appears to have covered up that fact.
Assange is also now offering help to the tech companies reportedly vulnerable to the CIA's tools. More on that with a roundtable of experts later this hour. Coming up next, though, we dive into the infrastructure industry. Why some of us saying it's a sector ripe for disruption. And a reminder that all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out. It's at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. right here in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. President Trump has called on Congress to find $1 trillion in public and private funds to invest in America's roads, bridges, airports and other projects. Now, with that in mind, Bloomberg Television has been drilling into infrastructure all week, like what we did there. The industry is one that's prime for disruption, with construction being one of the least digitalized sectors. Still with us, Greylock Partners' Chen, who invests in this space. Jerry, what I want to know is this efficiency or is this true disruption that we're about to see in construction?
I think it's a little bit of both. So if you look at construction labor over the past 10, 20 years, they actually lag labor productivity stats versus every other vertical. So construction labor has not been increasing productivity the past few years. So for sure, that's efficiency. Just get more productivity out of your sales force. But number two, we're seeing construction companies use technology like drones to measure progress, GPS to drive tractors. So they're actually using, pretty disruptive technologies to build buildings, bridges, roads faster and better.
I mean, it's quite amazing. I think this week alone we saw the first 3D printed building in less than 24 hours. I'm not sure everyone will want to live in it, but it's a step forward. Which of these types that you mentioned drones and GPS, is there any element that you think really will be the area that booms the first, that we all focus on?
Well, one company that we're involved with is called Runbix. It's focused on labor productivity. And Runbix actually attacks the #1 cost driver in every major construction site, labor, right? You have 1,000 people on a labor site doing a mine, a building, a bridge, and quite frankly, that productivity hasn't improved. So I think labor productivity may not be the first, but it's probably going to be the largest area of improvements and ROI for these construction companies.
There's our 3D printing building just going on right in front of our eyes. But so Runbix is one of them, their improvement. What about some of the other areas of the portfolio companies that you have? You sort of separate it quite nicely into compute, storage, and networking. These are the sort of areas that are going to come into construction. Sure. How does compute come into infrastructure?
If you think about infrastructure like construction, 3D buildings, and you think about the other area of infrastructure needed for this economy, digital infrastructure, right? The formerly so-called information superhighway. I think investment in cloud infrastructure, telco infrastructure, networking infrastructure is super important too, because every modern business is built not on your 3D buildings, but on bits and bytes. So we're investing aggressively on next-gen infrastructure for the physical world and for the virtual world as well.
What is the sort of opportunity from, say, a $1 trillion investment, however that might come from Donald Trump? Is this really the time? Was that the catalyst that got you super excited about these areas, or was this a long-term bet that you've been looking at already?
It's been a long-term bet because we're looking at different verticals from mining, healthcare, fintech, construction. And like you said, construction has lagged IT spending. But I was talking to a construction executive a few months ago, actually a few years ago, and he said the first thing that goes into every construction site now is Wi-Fi. And you think about that. Before they plow the first soil, lay the first brick or first drop of cement, they put in Wi-Fi. Because everyone needs email, everyone needs internet, everyone needs Snapchat or something. Wi-Fi is the first thing that goes in. And that got me thinking, once everyone has a cell phone, a smartphone, a tablet, and once Wi-Fi is everywhere, what can you do?
Runbix, which you already mentioned, one of your portfolio companies, this isn't just a US issue, though. This is an international issue.
Correct.
And we're seeing infrastructure spend, whether that's happening in the United Kingdom as well, across Europe. How global are these portfolio companies that you're looking at?
So Runbix is actually selling companies in South America, Asia, Europe, and the US. So like you said, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry across the globe, not just the US. And I think most of the companies we invest in, because they're startups, start locally around California, around the United States. But with construction, since there's these handful of large general contractors, like a Bechtel or a Skanska, that basically take the technology globally. So Bechtel can start a building here in Nevada or take it to the Middle East or Asia, and they'll bring their technology, their best practices across the globe.
And the people founding these startups, you almost have to be on the ground, have been building to understand some of the issues that arise, the lack of efficiency, where the pain points are.
Right.
Are the people coming in with these startup ideas, are they technicians? Are they technologists, or are they builders?
They have to be both, right? So to be a founder in a domain like construction or healthcare or fintech, you want that unique purple squirrel intersection of domain expertise that knows construction and have that entrepreneurial technology spirit. So in the Rumpke's case, Zach and Drew, the two co-founders, were ex-Navy veterans that worked in construction that met at Stanford Business School. So they had military background, worked in domain construction, and had the entrepreneurial high-tech Silicon Valley DNA here. Merge all three together, plus a little Greylock financing, and you have a company like Rumpke's attacking a $1 trillion market.
Drones and the like, is this drone companies, 3D printing companies that are suddenly realizing where they can expand into, or are they too coming from a construction, a perfect storm where they know everything?
I've seen both. So I've seen some of these drone companies and 3D printing companies started by founders in that domain say, oh, well, we could use drones to measure construction progress and start there. I've seen drone companies coming from the opposite way. They started around agriculture, military, construction, insurance, and they kind of threw everything against the wall and realized, oh, construction and infrastructure is what's working. So it kind of works both ways. It's sometimes more efficient if you know the domain first, but if you pick the wrong domain, you're kind of stuck there.
Yeah, Jerry Chen, please come back and talk to us again. It's great having you. Greylock Partners, Jerry Chen, of course, joining us this afternoon. And don't miss our week-long focus on infrastructure across Bloomberg Television. Still to come, a 50-pound drone that falls out of the sky can be pretty lethal. That's why researchers are testing these kinds of accidents on crash dummies. That story next. This is Bloomberg. Now, as drones become more commonplace, so does the risk of physical harm from perhaps a 50-pound robot perhaps falling out of the sky. But researchers at Virginia Tech are studying how to make them safer with the help of dummies. Check it out.
What's the risk of injury if a drone impact occurs that causes human tissue damage? It's a serious brain injury or fatal event. Here at Virginia Tech, we have the world's largest injury biomechanics program, so we do a lot of research in brain injury and concussion and skull fracture. The connection between helmets and drone is it's all about head injury risk. So what we have is the Hybrid 3 test dummy. This was developed over decades for the auto industry. It's the same dummy that's used to certify your car. We use that to get an idea of the interaction between the drone and the human.
So the aircraft are flown horizontally at maximum speed, square with the test dummy's head.
We have a separation of the molded plastic body.
Once the impact occurs, there's data gathered from numerous accelerometers which measure the G-forces.
When we look at quantifying injury risk, we typically look at two measures, accelerations and loads. So we can take those accelerations, we can take the force values, and we can compare those to other research we've done for auto safety and for military, and that's how we determine injury risk. If you look at cars and automobile safety, we put an incredible amount of work and effort and design in making sure they're safe. We're hoping to have the same sort of analysis for drones. Do you have some sort of parachute or device that slows the kinetic energy? Frangible, if it's not rigid and breaks apart on impact, that's going to reduce the energy transfer. Do you add padding, blade protectors? There's a lot of things we need to better understand to help the industry make safer drones, and that's the goal of the research.
Now, this story is featured in the latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week. And reporter Alan Levin joins us now from Washington with a little bit more fascinating piece. And what I want to understand is the regulatory environment around all of this as well, because the FAA has been doing a lot to help try and ensure drones come in a safe and standardized way. What are they doing in terms of potentially hurting humans?
Well, right now, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, is trying to write the first basic rules that will allow widespread flights over human beings, over crowds of people. The rule's a little bit on hold. They're trying to figure out how to deal with security concerns, like how do police know whether a drone is legal to be over a crowd or not. And it's also caught up in the Trump administration's go slow approach on new regulations. But they are working feverishly to come up with these standards right now.
And in terms of how the researchers are helping align themselves to where the standards might be set. I mean, I can think of the big companies that want it. If Amazon is going to be delivering your football shirt to you in the crowd, you're going to need to be able to ensure that it's allowed. What are the researchers doing to ensure that they don't hurt us?
Well, the whole point of this research is, this is such a new industry. People don't know what is going to happen if, in a worst-case scenario, when you have millions of these consumer drones being sold to people, what happens if one falls out of the sky and hits a child in the head? So what they're trying to do with these tests is to figure out what the parameters are, and then once they do that, as we heard in the video, then they can start trying to figure out mitigations, put padding on, cover the propellers, build them out of materials that break apart so they don't hurt as much when they impact, et cetera. And that's really the point of the research right now.
Have there been any incidents of accidents that are hurting people as such, or is it pretty minimal thus far?
It's hard to get a handle on the actual numbers, but if you go out on YouTube and online, there are really scores of cases. There was a tragic story in the UK last year or the year before in which a toddler lost an eye. There are a lot of them out there.
Alan Levin in Washington, thank you very much on Bloomberg News. Of course, you can check out Alan's full story on Bloomberg.com. Stick with us. Julian Assange is next. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. Prime Minister Theresa May says the UK is on a 2-year timetable to wrap a trade deal with the EU. That's despite a claim by the Danish Prime Minister that the process will take 15 years. May says it's in the interest of the UK and the EU to close the deal quickly. She also pledged to trigger Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty by the end of March. Scotland may hold a second referendum on the UK next year. That's according to Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. Scotland voted to stay in the EU in 2014. Sturgeon says independence is inevitable unless the UK softens its Brexit stance. Donald Tusk was re-elected EU Council President today. That's despite fierce opposition from his native Poland, where some favored another top politician over the former Prime Minister. He was re-elected at the EU summit in Malta. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held talks in Moscow today on the situation in Syria. Netanyahu praised Russia's role in fighting Islamic State. He also raised concerns about the presence of Iranian and Hezbollah forces in Syria. Japan says the 185 cases of cancer found in children who lived near the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster cannot be linked to radiation. Doctors at Fukushima Medical University said the cases were found due to blanket screening and not radiation that leaked from the plant. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. Thursday here in New York, already 6:30 Friday morning in Hong Kong, TGIF. I'm joined by Bloomberg's David Ingles with a look at the markets. David, good morning.
Yes, and a very good morning for you. So it's 6:30 here, as you mentioned. I'm about, give or take, about 10, 12 hours away from my happy hour here. But that being said, though, looking at the markets, futures indicating, slightly higher start. When you look at markets in Australia, we could be opening there about 10, 12 points higher. But we're dead flat, though, on the New Zealand markets, which are obviously the first market to open up. Now, when you look at Japanese stock futures, what are we doing now? We're looking to open higher by about 0.5%. The stronger, obviously, the dollar gets, the bigger the bid that you get on the Nikkei 225. Yields, though, on the way up. That's a story we're watching very closely today with the Aussie 10-year very close now to 3%. And, of course, South Korea is the other big story we're following today. It's Judgment Day for the suspended president there. Decision should be out in about 4 hours from now. We're looking to get, maybe, if she gets 6 out of the 8 votes to impeach her, then she's immediately removed from the office. I'm David Ingles in Hong Kong. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde. And our top story this hour, Airbnb raises more than $1 billion in its latest funding round. That boosts the valuation of the home-sharing startup to roughly $31 billion. This according to three people familiar with the company's efforts. Bloomberg first reported Airbnb's plans to increase its funding by authorizing the sale of an additional $150 million in equity. That was back in December. This company has now raised more than $3 billion to date and just turned a profit for the first time in the second half of last year. Another top story this week, WikiLeaks publishing nearly 9,000 files on the CIA's cyber spying capabilities. The disclosures highlight vulnerabilities in smartphones, TVs and software built by Apple, Samsung, Microsoft and others. Now, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange says he'll work directly with tech companies to help close those gaps in their security. He spoke in a webcast earlier.
Hearing these calls from some of the manufacturers, we have decided to work with them to give them some exclusive access to the additional technical details we have so that fixes can be developed and pushed out so people can be secured.
Joining us now to discuss what this does to the relationship between Silicon Valley and the US intelligence community is Bloomberg News reporter Nafisa Saeed, who covers this, and also with us from Washington, Eric O'Neill, national security strategist with the firm Carbon Black. He also is a former counterterrorism operative for the FBI. And Nafisa, I want to start with you because the CIA hasn't been commenting on the authenticity of this leaks, but they have been making some statements.
Yes, we've been hearing from the CIA, which usually you don't necessarily hear from them on a breaking news story. But yesterday, today, we've been getting statements. Today, they took a stab at Julian Assange, saying, quote, he's not really known as a bastion of integrity. And so that was pretty interesting. We've also heard from them saying that the American public should be deeply troubled by any kind of leaks that WikiLeaks may be putting out there that could, compromise U.S. intelligence and protecting the American people. So while they've not quite, confirmed anything with the leaks or these disclosures we're saying, they have come out very publicly to us, telling us directly that, they don't stand for any kind of, anything that would compromise U.S. ability to gather information. But they've also tried to make clear that they're not allowed to do electronic surveillance on U.S. soil. So you sort of see them pushing back at some of the accusations that we've been hearing from these disclosures over the last couple of days.
And talking of accusations we've been hearing, Julian Assange himself weighed in more on the webcast. I just want to have a hear of what he really felt was a Trojan horse from the CIA. Have a listen.
The CIA developed a giant arsenal, what appears to be the largest arsenal of Trojans and viruses in the world that attacks most of the systems that journalists, people in government, politicians, CEOs and average people use, didn't secure it, lost control of it, and then appears to have covered up that fact.
Eric, accused of losing control, then covering up the facts. How dangerous could it be if the CIA did indeed leave these vulnerabilities open for others to find as well?
Well, what we're saying is vulnerabilities, but the real name for these things is weapons. It's one thing to release the tools if you're WikiLeaks, but when you release the actual vulnerabilities, those can be weaponized because we've seen that within 24 hours of discovering a new vulnerability, especially if it's spread mass around the world, then attackers will use that vulnerability. And 99% of the major breaches that have happened because of an unpatched vulnerability. So if WikiLeaks actually wants to be responsible for once, then they need to take great care in how they release these vulnerabilities.
Nafisa, in fact, the FBI are now looking into how WikiLeaks came across this sort of information.
Right. WikiLeaks has told us that this trove of code and malware and viruses and 0 days or security vulnerabilities was circulating for a long time among government hackers and contractors. And they say one of those people handed that content over to WikiLeaks. So the question is, who would that have been? If the FBI and internally CIA is going to be, making lists of who those people are and trying to find who that one, person was that turned over this content. So that's something we're going to have to wait and see if this is going to be happening, kind of, investigations into this.
I mean, Eric, you mentioned if WikiLeaks was going to be responsible for once, it should have been careful how it put out these so-called weapons and indeed letting the tools be known. But surely the CIA should have been just as responsible?
Well, the CIA is responsible for conducting espionage and for gathering information all over the world in order to protect the counterintelligence of the U.S., to protect us here. So, there is a national security reason to protect the information and to be able to use these tools, because espionage today isn't conducted by sneaking into buildings and stealing files. It's conducted through cyber attacks. And so there is an offensive capability that every single nation uses, and this was the CIA's. And I do agree that there's a problem when the CIA loses the information.
Yeah, Nafisa, what's it like on the ground? What is the reporters all saying? What indeed are people all saying within government and within the White House about how the CIA should potentially have reacted and acted?
Well, we haven't had any confirmation that this content is actually, verifiable, that this is actually from the CIA. So no one has quite said that yet. We heard Sean Spicer, the White House, saying this is very, very serious, even though at one point during the campaign we did hear, we've heard President Donald Trump previously said that he loves WikiLeaks. So, kind of backstepping a little bit from those kinds of previous comments. But we've also seen, for instance, the fact that on the Hill, we've heard from John McCain saying this is extremely serious. We need to look into this. How did this get out? This puts American lives at risk. Could be that sources and methods are, now disclosed. So you have, on the one hand, some discomfort around how did this get out from the CIA, but also will this now compromise U.S. ability to gather intelligence and information as well?
And Eric, I've got to put to you, of course, this is a strained relationship we've seen between the tech giants and Washington at times. I mean, our minds go back to the San Bernardino shooting and the fact that they don't like to allow backdoors into their encryption. How do you think this puts the onus on the relationship going forward?
I think that government needs to make some very strong national security decisions about what they need to provide to tech companies. Here, if indeed the CIA did lose this information and they knew that it had proliferated and certain hackers were using it, I would have liked to see an earlier disclosure and maybe work with tech companies to help strengthen our defense, because that is security. Protecting the people here in the U.S. Is national security, especially something so important as a cell phone and our data, which is where we put everything that we do and say these days.
And even more so if the Internet of Things continues to grow. Eric O'Neill of Carbon Black, fantastic to have your viewpoints today. Nafisa Saeed of Bloomberg News, thank you very much indeed for all your reporting. Now, moving on, and one stock we're watching, it's FireEye. The cybersecurity company is facing a record low stock price after missing guidance in the latest earnings report. Now, CEO Kevin Mandia says the company's achieved consistency in its sales leadership and will reassure investors with more conservative forecasts going forward. Mandia also reiterated that FireEye isn't opposed to making acquisitions, although it's not part of the company's turnaround plan. Coming up, Snap wraps up its first full week of trading, and it's been quite a wild one. What we've learned about the company's projections, next. And this weekend on Bloomberg Television, we bring you our best interviews from the week, including our exclusive conversation with Udacity and Google X founder Sebastian Thrun. We'll get his take on the latest in automated driving. Tune in this Saturday for the best of Bloomberg Technology. This is Bloomberg. Facebook isn't done taking a page from Snap's playbook. The social media giant's mobile chat app Messenger just added a new feature called Day. It allows users to post photos and videos that disappear after 24 hours. And if that sounds familiar, it's because Snapchat created the disappearing posts called Stories. Now, over the past few months, features that resemble Stories have been unveiled for Facebook, WhatsApp, and where it's called Status, and Instagram, where it's also called Stories. The move is in part to keep up with what users might want and to prevent them from shifting their attention to a competitor's app. So, if Facebook's continued imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, how does that impact Snap's future as a publicly traded company? Shares closed the day down just 0.5%, and it's down over 7% since its IPO close of $24.48. Snap's stock has been taking hits as short sellers bet on future declines. Joining us now in Chicago is Ali Mogharabi, analyst for Morningstar, who has labelled the company as overvalued. Ali, that's 1, 2, 3. This is like of course, a triple strike that we're seeing from Facebook, and all of their messaging apps now taking a leaf out of Snap's book. How harsh is the competition?
It's very harsh, and that's why we think that over the next few years, Snapchat has to continue to invest in R&D, to continue to invest in R&D, to continue to invest in sales and marketing of its products, in order to attain additional users and generate user growth and therefore generate some ad revenues. So it's going to be tough competition for Snap.
Talk to us about that user growth. 158 million daily active users. They seem to be trying to say on the tour, on the IPO lead up, that perhaps they didn't need to grow that much more thicker and fast because actually it's the penetration, it's the addiction that they already have to the app. Do you buy that? How much do you want to see the daily active user growth?
Well, actually, we want to see that at a much higher rate. And actually, we have modeled it at a much higher rate. So we think that these guys are going to be successful in generating user growth. But in terms of engagement, in terms of interaction and spending time on the app, there's only 24 hours a day, basically, for users to use to be on multiple apps. So when there's engagement on Facebook, on Facebook's other apps, such as, of course, as you mentioned, Messenger and Instagram, it also limits the growth opportunity in terms of engagement on Snapchat.
What about the advertising opportunities? Because sometimes actually imitation is the best form of flattery because it vindicates the business model, it vindicates this type of new way of consuming media that perhaps the advertisers, the marketeers would be more attracted to.
It is very attractive. It's a big market, as Snap has mentioned, did mention on the roadshow. It's a very large market. It's growing fast. But the only negative part of it is that basically what we call the larger companies, the behemoths of the online advertising, such as Facebook and Alphabet's Google, they already have the large user base, especially Facebook. And so although we are pretty confident that advertising dollars will flow to Snapchat, given the features that it has and the innovation that it has, and the user data that it can compile, we think still a larger portion of the ad dollars will continue to go to Facebook, somewhat limiting the growth opportunity for Snap.
What about the leadership? Evan Spiegel, many feel that perhaps there's too much, obviously, control by Evan Spiegel and Bobby Murphy, the fact that there's no shareholder voting rights for those who've just bought into the IPO. But notably, is he the real lead creative in all of this? Does he need someone else to really be a clear number two, comes up with such product innovation that Facebook copies?
Well, I mean, in terms of innovation and in terms of running the company, in terms of having a very an environment that's energized with a lot of motivation, we think he's doing a good job. The rest of that remains to be seen. I mean, basically, this is where disruptive technology can come in at any time and force companies to change their entire strategies. So it remains to be seen how Spiegel will react to that. But yes, in terms of the control of the companies, I mean, they've got the voting rights, and let's put it this way. If there is a potential acquirer of this company and they come in and they bid on Snapchat, or Snap, I should say, it actually creates a lot of doubt in terms of whether Spiegel and Murphy will actually agree to that and agree to be sold. So that could create some problems for shareholders in the future.
Interesting. Ali Mogharabi, analyst at Morningstar, who says this is an overvalued stock. Hold it, but $15 is your price target. Thank you very much for joining us. Now to a developing story. Cloudera, the big data company backed by Intel, is working with Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan and Bank of America on its initial public offering. The company filed confidentially with the SEC for its IPO. Now, according to people with knowledge of the matter, Cloudera is planning to go public this year and is eyeing a valuation of about $4.1 billion. Now, a quick programming note. Tomorrow on Bloomberg Television, it's Jobs Day in the USA, and we're joined by Gary Cohn, Director of President Trump's National Economic Council. That conversation at 9:30 a.m. New York time, 2:30 p.m. in London. And coming up, ski season has been in full swing, but what happens when the snow doesn't come with it? The latest in snowmaking technology from the founder of American Skiing Company. That's next. This is Bloomberg. A story we're watching. Uber will stop the practice of showing fake versions of its app to government officials suspected of conducting sting operations on its drivers. The program is referred to as Greyball. It was often aimed at authorities who requested rides with the intent of ticketing drivers or impounding cars in areas where Uber wasn't allowed to operate. The system would cancel rides or display cars that weren't actually nearby. And underway now in northern New Hampshire is the $1.5 billion remake of the historic White Mountains resort, the Balsams. Plans call for new luxury condos and construction of the largest ski area in the northeast. As another season of skiing and snowboarding is winding down, Corey Johnson spoke with developer Les Otten, who says, well, he will employ the latest in snowmaking technology, a process that brings the art back to the science.
The idea is sort of the difference between a cook and a chef. Give them the same ingredients, and the chef comes out with something that you can charge $100 for, and the cook is slopping the same thing out for you at the diner for $15. The ingredients are always going to be the same, but the way you combine them, the way you put them together, and the way you manage them is the difference between making great snow and just something that's white. And what we're doing is taking current technology and putting the art back into snowmaking so that we make a product that you really want to ski on as opposed to something that's just white.
So talk to me about what that looks like. I mean, having skied or at least snowboarded a lot in the East Coast and snowboarded a lot in the West Coast, the snow we have out here is a lot better, a lot different. What are you trying to create?
Oh, you're trying to create a surface that when your skis are going across it, it doesn't make any noise. So it feels and tastes like packed powder to the skier. There's a certain density and a consistency that you can achieve using a little bit more energy and using a little bit smarter technology. At the end of the day, what you'd like is an experience where somebody goes skiing and they say, oh, well, that was just about as good as skiing out west, so they'll stay here in the east. And 15 or 20 years ago at Sunday River, that's what we used to do. Now the opportunity is to take modern technology and then combine it with the old artistry that we had 20 and 30 years ago and produce more efficiently, but not ultra efficiently, a really great product.
It's an interesting challenge you're facing there, too, in terms of developing those properties and selling real estate up there. But I also wonder, when you look at the growth in the business, I mean, do you see this as something that's got to be cash flow positive very early on, or is it something that can really grow with real estate slowly over a long time?
Well, we think initially coming out of the box that we'll be able to be cash flow positive, but the growth is going to go on for a very, very long time. We have approvals to build the resort. You know, we've got decades of building that we can go through with the approvals that we have so far. So the exciting part of this is we can build the 21st century resort now and keep building it over the next 3 or 4 decades.
What other things are you doing now that you couldn't have done 20 years ago thanks to technology, besides the snowmaking, which sounds like you think you could have done 20 years ago, just no one cared?
Well, I think advancements in lift technology have made lifts better, more reliable, and more efficient as far as their cost to their capacity. Things like combining activities at a resort so that you can sleep in the same room, park your car. If you want to go snowmobiling or four-wheeling, you can do that from the same place that you could go off to go kayaking, swimming, or alpine skiing. So it's sort of like what we're sort of envisioning, and I hate to make this analogy, but it's the best one that I've got. So when you stay in one of the Disney hotels, you can go to 4 or 5 different, 6 different lands each day, and the family can go in 4 or 5 different directions if they want. What we're trying to accomplish is have something where you can get great alpine alpine skiing, a wonderful Nordic spa, go cross country, go to a cooking school, do yoga, and in the summertime flip those activities with golf, fishing, tennis, kayaking, boating, swimming, all from the same place, never having to use your car again, so that you really have a destination resort. And then the whole family, if they want to do different activities, there are different activities for the whole family to do every day.
That was Les Otten, American skiing company founder from our Boston bureau. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.